Good morning, everyone. My name's James Daly. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bury North in Greater Manchester, or Lancashire, as my constituents would not forgive me for saying. I'm the co-chair of the APPG for Northern Culture. And as you can see, we're in our second evidence session regarding our inquiry into the cultural value of sport to the North Town, cities and communities. And certainly as the MP for Bury, with our football team being expelled from the Football League and the events that have happened since then, this is a very personal subject to my heart. And as I have got written here in front of me, we have a blockbuster panel today. And certainly we have Rick, who's the esteemed chair of the English Football League. But two people who are, I think it's fair to say, Chris will start smiling now, but two legends, I think, and two people who have achieved, I never know what to do when you're in the presence of greatness. I genuinely never know how to introduce them, but two great people, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, Chris Boardman MP, who are not only great sports people, they are now involved in various activities which they're going to talk about, which are contributing back to our community. Chris is involved in Greater Manchester, where I am, in various projects as well. And I can just want to say to all the panelists, thank you so much for taking part in this. This is a really important inquiry to Jill, the Secretariat, all the MPs who are involved in this. And I think it's a really interesting area. When we've had our evidence, that is going to contribute into an evidence base, which is going to help the University of Sheffield produce a report, which we are then going to submit. And hopefully the time remaining in this Parliament really push this agenda and really push our proposals and really seek to make a difference on this particular subject. So I want to say thank you very much to everybody. I'm going to have to do some housekeeping here, else Jill won't forgive me. We encourage you to get involved and raise any questions for our speakers in the chat. Joining the debate online using the hashtag Northern Culture Inquiry and tagging at NCAPPG. Without further ado, I will hand over to our first witness, the great Chris Boardman MP. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank the committee on behalf of Sport England for the chance to contribute to your inquiry into the cultural value of sport to northern cities, towns and communities. And I think cultural value is probably a really good way to frame it, as in my view, sport is just not a big enough term to cover what exercise, activity and grassroots participation delivers for society. I think we need to focus on those values. It's a more active nation. That's how we ensure the NHS has a future, by having less people using it. It's increasing productivity of a workforce with less sick days and more healthy life years. And it's a sense of personal achievement for individuals that right now might be in the midst of a very uncontrollable life. So it's impacting the national health of a nation. And one that we tend to forget, a convening force for families, what we do together on Thursday evenings, or in my case, a Saturday morning at a parkland. So it uniquely spans the full spectrum of socio-economic backgrounds, which is something I'm going to touch a little more on in a moment. For all of those reasons, it's why, and it's not hyperbole to say, sport's been a valued part of society for thousands of years. And it's also the reasons I took on the role as chair of Sport England, because of its Uniting the Movement strategy, which seeks to deliver all of those outcomes by making activity, exercise and sport available to everyone, regardless of their income or their postcode, which is obviously pertinent to this inquiry. And the approach taken is unashamedly targeting resources at areas that need it most. And many of those are, of course, in the north, where Chair, you alluded, I live, so I have a vested interest here. The approach, working directly with communities, as well as through national governing bodies of sport, was started back in 2017 with 12 pilot schemes, and 6 of those were in the north of England. And those pilot schemes aim to do it differently, to empower and enable local groups and organisations, and they told us what they needed, what barriers were in their way, a true partnership rather than a transactional arrangement. And in some cases, we were able to convene. It might have been education, health, social care, just get them together. And they co-created a new product, if you like. And in other areas, we were simply empowering people who were already embedded into the community to do what they were doing better or bigger. So they told us, if you like, how we could achieve our aims. And it quickly began to yield results. Pre-COVID, our Active Lives report, which is the biggest of its kind in the country and one of the biggest in the world, was showing that local delivery pilot areas inactivity was dropping 2.5 times faster in some cases than areas without. And in our latest report, which was published last week and focused on children and young people, the areas with LDPs were recovering faster than those without. So that gave us an awful lot of confidence. We are rapidly building on that learning and expanding this place-based approach, is what we call it, to increasing activity and take-up of sport. And earlier this year, we confirmed, we committed more than £500 million of funding over the next 5 years to 121 system partners, as we termed them. And each of those has a unique reach into local networks to tackle inequalities and deliver against the ambitions set out in that strategy. So I'm roughly going to stop there. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of how Sport England's focusing its efforts on the term that's been coined, meeting people where they're at, and removing the real barriers in communities and levelling up, using sport and physical activity as a medium to get those socially valuable outcomes. A closing point, though, because of those outcomes, sport needs to be trumpeted across government. Sport is not just a topic for DCMS. It's pertinent and powerful for health, for education. It should influence planning, how we use our public space with Do Look. And of course, the Department for Transport, as you alluded, Chair, we build active travel back into people's everyday lives. And that's my other job as Active Travel Commissioner for England. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Jill, can I just ask, I can certainly hear a noise in the background. Is it me, or is that perhaps Louis can answer that? Can you as well, Chris?
Yeah, I can hear a little bit of one. I'm not sure whether it's from you, James, or Chris.
All right. Okay. We will plow on. Chris, can I ask you a question to start off with? And this is really important to me. I mean, I'm from Huddersfield originally, although I'm from Parry now, but there's stories about this all over. And I always think about Bradley Mills Cricket Club. So Bradley Mills Cricket Club was formed in the 1830s in Huddersfield. It survived the Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, everything that literally the world could throw at it. But in modern times, it folded because there was a lack of interest in supporting that club in what I would call a deprived part of Huddersfield. And what I'm really concerned about is that in general, in sporting clubs and the value that people can get out of those, is we're ghettoising sports. So if you're in a middle class area, you may well have your cricket club or your athletics club or your whatever it is. And it's harder and harder in deprived areas, or disadvantaged areas, sorry, let me rephrase that, to have those clubs that were at the centre of these communities for a long, long time. And I think the cultural value, the sporting value, the health value of having clubs like this at the heart of local communities is being lost. Now, I don't know whether you have a view on that or what you think we could perhaps do about that as politicians.
No, thank you. I met the chair of the ECB a few weeks ago, and we discussed how we could leverage specifically the facilities that cricket owns countrywide is absolutely huge, and its potential is enormous. It might be interesting to know that we target our resources not actually on location and postcode, but on indices of multiple deprivation, it's called. So basically, we target resources unashamedly, I think the term I used earlier, where it's needed most. And many of those areas are in the northwest of England. So, and I think our latest report has showed that the increase in those areas is actually going up. So I think ostensibly, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think we have an opportunity now to maximise those resources as well. So that cricket club, for example, could be where a cycling club meets, or where the other activities take place. And we need to share knowledge of where that's happening, where we're leveraging what we've got to the max, where places of good practice share it elsewhere.
So I'm just going to bring Sarah Brickcliffe in. My colleague Sarah's the MP for Hindburn. Sarah.
Thanks, James. Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you. You talked about public space and planning, and one of the issues that we seem to be finding in the Northwest is actually our grassroots clubs having the adequate facilities now, but being able to grow in the future. So what policies do you think are needed to be able to facilitate that with local authorities?
Well, the partnership approach is one that we've always taken. Certainly, the valuing of public spaces is immense. It's something that once it's gone. Really hard to recover. And part of our job is to protect those spaces. And I think their value, what I was trying to allude to at the start, it needs to be more than just one department who understands what the impact of this loss is, what happens if we don't. And I think that's for the likes of myself and Sport England to use our voice to make sure that value is across government, not just for one department. And we have had an example through COVID, I think, of just how incredibly important they were to society. So I think that's the main thrust, and the funding is there. Probably one other point to make, slightly sideways actually to your question. About a third of people don't relate to the word sport, and I think perhaps many people assumed I'd come to Sport England with a very top-end elite focus, and I'm actually quite the opposite end of the spectrum. So, and I mentioned things like parkrun earlier on. These are the spaces where those activities can take place, and they engage the third of community that don't engage with sport, but they will do family activities, and they will go and have fun, and they'll do things with the kids. And without those spaces, we can't do it. So wholeheartedly support with the partnering actually to make sure that we keep those spaces available for public use. And often that means partnering, because a park, and I had a look at some in Birmingham earlier this year, it can be an open air cinema, it can be local community groups, it can be where you do bike training, and we have to bring all of those partners together. It isn't all the job of, say, Sport England to fund that, but we can convene, and that's what we're busy doing now.
Thanks, Chris. And just one of the key problems is when I speak to my grassroots clubs is actually, so we have the ability to help them find the grants that are available, but it's very difficult to. I don't know whether that's right.
Multiple mics open usually.
Rick, would you mind putting yourself on mute?
That worked?
Yeah, I think that's worked.
So we have the facilities to be able to help our grassroots clubs find these grants that are available, but it's a very complicated system, and when they don't have the support for somebody to help them write these bids, we seem to run into a situation where they're looking to local authorities to see if they can help them. I mean, is there a way that we can potentially make it easier for our grassroots clubs to be able to know what they can access, but also receive the support that they need to be able to bid for the funding that's there?
Well, the short answer on that one, I think, is yes. So the strategy that I alluded to is only about a year old. And so now we're moving wholeheartedly into the delivery phase. And there's been a lot of inward focus to completely restructure the organisation, which is, I wouldn't say we're in the middle of, we're coming out of now. But a big part of that is to focus on the outcome for the user and to streamline as much as possible. A lot of lessons were learned during COVID, where we just had to act quickly. Our risk appetite had to go up. So I think the short answer is yes, and we'd welcome contact. In fact, we're already seeking contact from a host of different partners to see what it is they need to clear the red tape. And it's a real challenge when you're working with amateurs, when you have to ensure all of the safeguarding and all of those things are in place, but you're also relying on volunteers. So we'd be really happy to write to you and give you an outline of things that we could do there.
Great, thanks, Chris. And just one other thing that we notice in Hindburn is actually football is the top of the list when anybody is doing sport in Hyndburn, but actually things like rugby, etc., feel like they are pushed aside because of the focus on football. And one of the things that we're questioning is how we raise a profile of these other sports that exist, but also how do we increase women's participation in these sports that exist in constituencies?
Well, on the latter first, I think that, I mean, the success this year was an absolute delight to watching the Lionesses' success in particular. I think women's sport is coming through more prominently than ever before this year, which is great. And I went to watch the rugby, both men's and women's, a couple of weeks ago. And I think that at last we've made a breakthrough there, and it is becoming something that people want to do. And we are really keen to capitalise on that interest. And to drive that forward. In terms of the first part of your question, I've forgotten what it was. What was it?
It's just sometimes it feels to other grassroots sports that the focus is on football a lot. So you cricket clubs and things like that, the space that's needed isn't necessarily provided.
I think you're right. I mean, football is very enticing. I've never been involved with balls. Me and balls just don't get on. But what I do witness is how the reach of anything where you don't need a facility, and you can go out in the street, you can go into a park, is huge. But I think giving the visibility to those other, I think it's also the responsibility of those particular sports. So cricket, as I mentioned earlier, that's reinventing itself at the moment, and the street game, which has repackaged it and is going out into thousands of communities now, making it more accessible. So there's definitely some learning that I think we could share between different sports as well, and how they connect with more people. And again, Sport England can help facilitate that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Alex Sobel is with us, my colleague. Alex, have you got anything you want to add?
Thanks. I'm not sure how I appear on the screen, but if you can hear me, that'll that's a good start.
We can,
just black.
We can hear you, Alex.
Okay, that's good. So it's great that you're here, Chris, and from a Sport England perspective. I used to chair the Basketball All-Party Group, and I'm vice chair of it now. Mike Penning, a Southern Conservative MP, chairs it now, but never mind. Basketball is the second most popular sport for urban teens and for young black people in the UK after football. But it's, the level of support at grassroots isn't there. There are other sports which aren't, the sort of main team sports in the UK, which are, football, cricket, rugby, which are really strongly played, particularly in urban areas. I'm thinking of something like tennis, which does have a strong governing body and does have a lot of support in the LTA. But there's the real issues around volunteers, around coaching, around opportunities, around facilities, particularly for basketball. And I'm just wondering about how we support some of those other sports. You mentioned running and parkrun. I do parkrun. That's great. Junior parkrun's brilliant, and it gets people into running and athletics. But again, and that is well volunteered in most places. But I do think that there's lots of, particularly now with the cost of living crisis and the pressure on people's lives, that both facilities and volunteering is a real issue. I'm just wondering what we can do to support that, to make sure that people young people particularly have access to sport, which isn't football.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how to package this. We need to support what people want. I mean, the premise of our approach now is to say, what do you want in your community? What do you do? What would appeal to people? And starting with play as well. When you mention young people, particularly, starting with fun and enjoyment and satisfaction. All of those things are not always the same thing. And what it is that they want to do. So not us telling. I think that's kind of old school for us to say, we need to make this popular. This is what we want to fund you to do. We're actually coming at the other way and to tell us what you need to get your community more active and to start to get interested in exercise. I mean, I know that we committed £8.5 million to Basketball England in the spring as part of our system partner funding, and for the next 5 years. Basketball in particular has a lot of potential. It can be played in really small areas. Again, it spans the socio-economic and cultural divides. And they're the things that I think Sport England is most interested in at the moment, to be able to focus in on the ones that pay back the most over larger areas, and looking to invest more specifically and again unashamedly in those that need it most, and not specifically a postcode. I think it ends up being often the same thing in terms of northwest divide, but it's an approach I think that's standing up to scrutiny and yielding results.
Anything else, Alex?
I just want to say, actually, Manchester's particularly well provisioned for basketball, and we've got the national centre there, but other northern cities not so much. But the other thing I was going to ask was about mental health and well-being. So, for, just generally across the piece, across all ages, sport and undertaking sort of physical activity is one of the biggest, non-medical uplifts for mental health and well-being. And we don't really, it's not, my perception is, and you can correct if I'm wrong, is that we don't really promote those benefits to people. We generally promote the physical benefits of sport and physical activity. I mean, it's in the name. And I'm just wondering, I think we get more people involved and more breadth, particularly in non-competitive sport and physical activity, if we promote the mental well-being. I'm just wondering whether that's something that Sport England are thinking about.
Massively. And if I can give you an example, actually from my other job as well, I visited a school just outside Ipswich a couple of weeks ago, and this is what we actually need. We need stories that link our lives, what we relate to the data. And there's 900 kids who ride to school every day, which I thought, what? That's ridiculous. That's 61% of kids. And sure enough, it was the case. And they'd inherited a 1930s cycleway and built around it rather than on it. And so there was reasons why that was a phenomena in Cowsgrave School. But one of the things I hadn't realised when I got there was the head teacher said that this really helps with bullying. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, this bullying tends not to happen in school. It happens on the journey. And buses are often a kettling situation for kids without adult supervision. And when they could travel actively under their own steam, they're not just getting a physical benefit. And the school actually saw significant changes in absenteeism and healthy body weights, very much akin to Europe, as you'd expect. But on the mental health side, kids had transport freedom, which gave them, they were able to choose how they traveled. They chose who they traveled with and when they travel, and that made a big difference for bullying. So the benefits are much wider than we think.
Forgive me, just in terms of that, Pete Zanza-Terra, Pete, forgive me if I've pronounced that incorrectly, has asked, sport in many of its forms is hugely reliant on private car travel. Chris, with both your hats on, how can we make the journey to participate or view sport more healthy and inclusive?
Well, Sport England and Active Travel England, it's you could say it's a slightly incestuous relationship, I'm not sure, but we work incredibly closely together, and we're seeing huge amounts of crossover. In fact, it's why I actually wanted to take on both roles. On the Venn diagram, how we use public space. So Sport England is a statutory consultee, so is Active Travel England, will be next summer, and how we use our public space. So we have to make a conscious effort for how we do it, and the benefits are again across multiple departments, not least health. So Chris Whitty is one of the advisors because he can see the benefit. So I think that convening really is the most important bit. So we see the value of its decarbonisation. It's cheap travel right now as well. So we just win on so many fronts, and I'm delighted that I can bring those two organisations, those two arm's length bodies together to join forces and so have a louder voice. Chris,
we could genuinely talk all day in respect to this subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been genuinely fascinating. And now move on, please, to Rick Parry. Rick, I think we all know the chair of the English Football League. Rick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, James. And apologies to Chris, but I'm going to focus solely on football and professional football at that. Thanks for the opportunity, Chair. We've sent a written submission, which I hope is helpful. We certainly stand by everything we put in that. So I will be relatively brief. Professional football started in the north of England. The EFL has always been headquartered here. And today, almost half of our teams, 28, are northern. And of course, the Premier League has northern clubs that are consistently amongst the very best in Europe. I think we can genuinely say that the north of England is one of the regional powerhouses of the global game. These clubs make a major economic and social impact on their communities. I don't think that's in doubt. It's demonstrated on the pitch. EFL attendances exceeded 17 million last season, and off it, where clubs' community activities touch almost 1 million people every year. Perhaps the real significance of this came to the fore during the pandemic, when we saw clubs providing support for people's physical and mental well-being. Clubs and their owners deserve enormous credit. From my perspective, it was a huge privilege to witness the innovation, the ideas, the commitment that people were making, purely because it was the right thing to do. And it's vital that we secure a sustainable future for all of our clubs, a future where they're not dependent on owner funding and where local ownership is a realistic prospect for every club. Not just an EFL issue. We all recognise the importance of the pyramid, and it's essential that clubs can rise up and down the pyramid, up and down the leagues, without fear of financial catastrophe. And indeed, it's not just a football issue. It's a genuine levelling up opportunity, because all of this resonates perfectly with pride in place. That's what football clubs are all about. And it is why it is so important, and no surprise, James, that I'm touching on this, that the recommendations of the fan-led review are implemented in full, and that the white paper emerges very soon. It's all about sustainable clubs in the long term, sustainability which requires redistribution of revenues to make clubs solvent. The government recognised this in its response to the fan-led review when it talked about vast revenue tiers between leagues. And alongside, it needs improved regulation to ensure that additional money isn't used wisely and clubs don't waste it on inflating wages. Redistribution and regulation go hand in hand. They are inseparable. Now, of course, football could have solved the redistribution itself at any stage over the last 30 years, but it hasn't. It's allowed a gap to become an unbridgeable chasm. I'm not going to throw too many statistics at you, but this one I think is pretty chilling. In 1993, first year of the Premier League's turnover was £45 million, and the EFL's was 34 million, 75% of that level. By 2021, Premier League's turnover had grown to 3.2 billion, a 70-fold increase, but the EFL's had only grown to 189 million, a mere 6% of the Premier League level. In absolute terms, a gap of 11 million had grown to 3 billion. And we all have to ask ourselves in football, how was this allowed to happen? And it's no wonder that the government talks about the vast tiers. And big problems require big solutions. As we've said repeatedly over the last 2.5 years, we need a fundamental reset. What we don't need is another fudge. We don't need a tinkering around the edges. We're never going to have a better opportunity to get this right. Indeed, we may never have another opportunity. So again, the plea is white paper is needed and the fan-led review needs to be implemented in full. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I've just got two very quick questions. The first one is, we're obviously talking about from a parliamentary inquiry, which is looking at the health, the sporting, the cultural benefits of sport, and you've touched on that in respect of it. Do you think the academy system is helping grassroots participation? And one of the things that leads me to say that in terms of football, in the areas where I know, Rick, I'm talking about amateur football or there is participation falls off a cliff at 16, 17, 18. You go to areas like I am now, there are hundreds of teams at under 10, under 11, under 12. Kids perhaps go to academies, lots of good players, and they, most of them sadly don't make it. It may be a great experience, but I wonder whether it's having a positive impact on long-term participation and commitment to local football clubs now as part of the world?
I think it's a fair question, James. I think that the academy system does do good things. I mean, two of my boys went through the academy system, didn't make it, but came out and continued playing. And they look back fondly. Frankly, they cherish every minute that they were involved. So it's been beneficial. I know there are issues in terms of people who don't make it. And there have definitely been challenges in terms of, I mean, I've always thought, to be honest, that academy is a misnomer because it implies a degree of elitism and success that, maybe comes too soon. And the very nature, as you touched on, of football is that you only have to look at the numbers game. The majority are not going to make it. 2 or 3 from every age group might, but you need a team for people to play in. So you do need to add people. And I think it's really important when children come into the academy that they're given a realistic set of expectations. But what they do get, the positives, they do get a magnificent footballing education with fantastic facilities, which as I said, I think is an enormous benefit for everybody who goes through this.
Rick, can I ask you just another question? We're talking, you've touched on the Fanland Review and how we can utilise football clubs throughout the North. We could name, Sarah's got Accrington Stanley in her constituency. We've got different football clubs everywhere. You see, one of the things that football, in terms of the financial model that it's got, is pretty much unsustainable at a professional level. In my view, in the lower divisions, unless you've got a very rich person running the club. What I just wanted to ask was, what do you think that football clubs have got to step up to the mark and see themselves as community institutions of cultural value, just as much as sporting institutions? I don't know whether Rick's stunned by that question or whether he's. Rick, come back, Rick. Jill, should we move on to Tanni, or should we wait for Rick to reappear?
I don't know if Sarah or anybody else wants the question. There are a couple of other questions, but I think we should probably move on and then.
Sorry, can I just ask you in terms of just generally about football? I mean, you've got Accrington Stanley in your constituency. I mean, what's your general views on the cultural value of your local football teams in areas like ours?
I mean, I'm quite lucky with Accrington Stanley because they put on a lot of events, whether that's an annual shirt giveaway to get all of the year 3 children involved each year and actually promote them getting involved. And what you see is the knock-on effects that they then bring their families to football games, and it generates revenue for the club. So I would say that one of the positives that I've got in my patch is actually Stanley do a lot, but that comes down to very good local ownership. Which is something that the Fan-led Review discusses. It's something that the Better Deal for Football discusses. One of the things that we're seeing now is there's the Better Deal for Football that's coming by the PL and the Fan-led Review. All in all, the conclusion needs to be that the support is there for grassroots clubs as well, which is what they both talk about. So it is better to come to a conclusion sooner rather than later, so we can see this filter through to the clubs that need the support.
Okay, good stuff. We're going to come back to you, Sarah, in a second. Tanni, would you mind stepping into the breach here as Rick is sadly frozen? But I just wondered if you, in terms of your general view, I mean, I think what we're looking at as well is this idea of cultural value, of value added, that sporting for both the individual and the community, do you know what I mean? The club, the organisation, whatever it is, it is just as beneficial in the sense of whether you're dealing with an individual sport like tennis and some of the things that you're involved in, or football. And if you could just give us any views you've got on that and whatever else you've got to say to us. But it is a genuine honour to have you here today. I must give you your full title, Baroness Grey-Thompson.
Thank you very much. And can I just do a really quick declaration of interest? Because I live in the other north, the northeast of England, but I'm involved as a trustee of the Stadium of Light and president of the LGA, and up until this summer was chair of UK Active, but I'm now chair of Sport Wales, which is where I'm originally from. And I think we talk about a lot of challenges. sport, physical activity. We say sport when we mean physical activity, physical literacy, we mean volunteer, we mean a whole bunch of things. And it never quite gets up the political agenda. So we've got loads of data on inactivity. We've got loads of data on the benefits of activity. But there just seems to be a mismatch in terms of actually making this really big impact. And at danger of sort of repeating what Chris said, you know, although I come from elite sport background, unless we change the pattern of behaviour at grassroots level, we're just kicking the can down the road. And, you know, used to have sports and arts sort of together. And I think we do need to think about sport in much bigger terms than just watching it on TV or, you know, some of the elite sport we see. And there's massive benefits to joining together in a way that we don't. So actually to get education and health and sport in the same room is reasonably difficult. But unless we're able to look at what children and young people do at schools, you know, actually, you know, accepting, you know, the challenges of women, you know, women are just 80% of women are not fit enough to be healthy. That has a massive impact. And so we've got to understand the issues from a local level as well, because although I spend half my life in London, it's really funny, you know, we talk about active travel in London, you get off a bus stop earlier. Where I live, a bus stop earlier could be 2 miles down the road. And so we need to have it much higher up the government agenda, I'm bound to say that, but also take a local approach to finding solutions, because we've never, I think, found enough solutions to really, you know, turn in the tide of inactivity, which is, you know, is a UK active phrase.
It's a really interesting thing. I mean, sport does something unique, which probably politics can't do, in that it brings, so if you take football as the ultimate example of this, it could potentially bring thousands of people together in one place, in one time, unified together from every different background. Sometimes it's not as inclusive as we need it to be, but it's like a captive audience in some senses, isn't it? That we've got this audience of people who are committed to watching or supporting this, and it's how we use that product to, you know, to help and assist and you know what I mean, Tanni, in respect to that. I think it's just quite a unique thing that politics should grab onto and use for the general social good.
Yeah, and Nelson Mandela said sport has the power to change the world. It does have a way to unify, bring people together. You know, through sports projects, I've seen amazing things through, you know, Fight for Peace in terms of, you know, using boxing to bring people together to tackle sexual health and domestic violence and all sorts of things. But something that was mentioned earlier about, you know, applying for local grants. Small clubs are continually having to apply for small pots of money, trying to find where that money is, have to change sometimes projects every 3 years because they've got to do something new. Instead of investing small amounts across the piece will generate big benefits. And also, you know, on the back of the pandemic, we've seen real challenges with volunteering. I mean, Chris said as well that, you know, we've got to get the safeguarding right and the DBS checks, and, you know, that it's important to do that. But if people are struggling to come back to volunteering for all different reasons, they're going to be less physically active as well. So I think it's important and I sort of sometimes do, we think about the participants, but actually the coaches, the volunteers, they, you know, actually, if you go to a football match, I mean, the last one I went to was at West Ham, you've got to walk a reasonable length, you know, from the tube station to get there. Now, I'm not sure how you can sort of combine that with physical activity figures. There's bright people who can, but it doesn't actually have to be plain football where you can get your activity from. And, you know, I think we need to just be much better at the choice of activities we're able to offer young people. And, you know, a really frightening statistic, again, from UK Active was that we know that children in the summer holidays lose about 75% of their fitness. The idea they're out playing all summer is, you know, I'm not sure was ever quite true, but in 2020, they were out of school for 29 weeks. So the most marginalised, the people from the most challenged backgrounds will never make that up unless we do something now. And that's really important.
Sorry, Tanni, as if by magic, Glyn Howardson has asked a question in the chat. Now, this is a very long question, so I'm going to try and bring it down. But what Glyn says is there is no little natural funding stream for research, impact and knowledge and of the transfer into sport and physical activity. Sorry, The North East, for example, has incredible academic partners that are capable of understanding the challenges, generating new knowledge and inputting into solutions for our communities. It would be great to see more resources into our knowledge hubs to support the collective effort. And although I didn't read that out very well, and that's quite a powerful point, Magdalene, about, you know, academic research, about, you know, a base which we can show that, you know, that this has real social good for everyone in our communities.
Yeah, I mean, there's research all over the place. And again, academic institutions are, you know, trying to find money to do this. It is actually, I think, a step forward. We've been bringing some of this research together. You know, Laureate Sport for Good have research of, you know, every pound invested can save £3.50 to £5 out of the criminal justice system. But it's all bits and pieces that don't necessarily join together into then action, because action costs. And it's easier to kick the can down the road than it is to keep people either out of the criminal justice system or out of the NHS. And, you know, I kind of hope through COVID, our relationship with the NHS has changed in a more positive way. But Simon Stevens said this a couple of years ago, you know, about physical activity being the miracle cure. We you know, GPs prescribe statins very quickly because it's quick and easy, and then people don't have to change their lifestyle. You know, who steps in to encourage people to change their lifestyle or tell people to change their lifestyle is quite a difficult one, depending what side of the political spectrum you're on. But we actually have to empower people to think about how they change their behaviour as well, because the NHS in the current format is not sustainable.
Tanni, can I just bring, I think we've got Ken Knott. Ken's got his hand up, so I'm hoping that Ken, by magic, is going to appear now. Ken, the floor is yours, if you are about. See, Tanni, me and technology just do not do it. Jill is now going to come to my rescue, hopefully.
Yeah,
Hi,
he's
Ken.
there. He's there, should be able to speak now, Ken. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on. Hopefully Ken will come back to us. Tanni, just as a final point, Tanni, sport and culture. Now, you probably could write a dissertation, you know, on that sort of question. But in terms of what you see sports cultural value, we've talked about the NHS, we've talked about health, talked about all those benefits. But in terms of culture, in terms of community, in terms of belonging, what do you feel about it? Do you think it has a part to play?
It has a huge part to play into, you know, bringing communities together. You just see, you know, whether it's Middlesbrough Football Club or it's the local football club around the corner from me, it has an incredible impact in terms of joining communities. And if we're serious, you know, about levelling up, if we're serious about the end, all these different bits, we have to be much better as a sector joining together. And I think sometimes, you know, elite sport is after the same young people. If you're talented, you could be talented in a number of sports. That, to me, sort of can look after itself. But if we're not giving opportunities to young people to try things and to try numerous different things, we're going to miss a trick. And I sat on a select committee last year, and one of our recommendations was to take sport out of DCMS and to put it into health, because then that changes the whole conversation about legacy. You know, it's not just about, you know, and actually, if you go to Olympic Park in Stratford, it's incredible what they've done there. But we've just got to change the conversation and just be better at extolling the virtues of sport and physical activity, but also having a better understanding of actually the cultural impact it does make.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tanni. I'm going to come back to you, Tanni, in a second, but I think Rick has reappeared. Please, Rick, are you with us?
James, it's Ken not here. You gave
We'll
me
go to Ken instead. Ken, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for allowing us to join. I chair Stockport County Football Club, and many of the issues you're debating, we're wrestling with. I think what you need is, or what we're trying to do, is form a partnership with the local authority and, as a board, ensure that everything we do is underpinned by community outreach programs. That's about expanding the fan base, but it's also about ensuring that our academy has a purpose beyond elite football. So we've developed an education program where we have a partnership with the Trafford College Group, where we've got 180 learners coming through the academy, but we're broadening the education curriculum because, as Rick said earlier, most of the kids don't make it. So it's very important that they can, have a future beyond football if that's not successful. But I think the cultural value that Stockport County can have to its town is absolutely huge, both through the education platform, the academy, and the community trust program, where we're reaching out to the most disadvantaged parts of the community. And that, I think one of the difficulties we find is we're trying to develop an infrastructure for education and community outreach across the borough, and the funding programs available to support that are very confused.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you look at the work of Stadium of Light in terms of what they did through the before and after pandemic, in terms of, food banks, education, actually work with mums in terms of helping them with their literacy skills, mums being active with their children, that's the power that Sunderland has, because it gets young people through the door, through the education system. For children who've been excluded, they're not going to go back into school, but they'll walk into Foundation Light, and so it's kind of valuing that is really important as well, because football, I mean, lots of sports can do things. I think actually football should be praised for the way that it has stepped up, but it can do things that other institutions can't.
But Tanni, can I bring in, I'll just bring Ken and Chris in on this question from Zahid, because I think this is a fundamental question when you talk about culture and an inclusive culture. So Zahid says this: sport is a powerful force for good. It can and does bring a collective sense of being, which was what we're talking about, and we're seeing that during the World Cup. However, there remain challenges. Out of 4,000 professional players, only a dozen are South Asian. I don't know what the cause is, but I'd like more to be done. We have real talent that isn't getting its way to the top. And I think another example of that is if you look in professional sport, and certainly professional football, the lack of opportunities for black managers, for people of Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, is scandalous. We should have, compared to the amount of people who are playing the sport, the people who are at the top of the sport, there's some real challenges in respect to that. So that's a big question, Ken, but I just wonder if you have any views on that.
I think what we're trying to do is outreach to all secondary schools and primary schools across the whole of the borough. It's about inclusivity, giving everyone the opportunity to participate, irrespective of where they sit in the social ladder. They need the ability to come on board and be developed and to participate.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it has to be more it has to be as well as systematic change. So our code for sport governance has just been strengthened quite dramatically, and diversity is a really big part of it, and it is a requirement for funding that there is a plan in place. The diversity and inclusion action plan is in place. So I think to change the culture, we have to change the structure of what we value as well. So we are proactively doing that. I think both Tanni and I, in our respective roles, we have responsibilities to ensure the boardrooms represent the community at large. And I think, hand on heart, I can say I've just gone through a huge recruitment process, both for Sport England and for Active Travel England, and I'm doing that. And where that capability doesn't exist, be it as a player, be it as a manager, be it in a boardroom, then I think we need to actually look at going, who has the potential, and train. So I know that there is a scheme called Board Apprentice, just as an example, where you can go, right, this person's not yet there yet for something of this magnitude, but actually we'll carry a couple of extra people on a board or in a system within a sport. And think, right, they can develop. And I think all of those things, we've got to make this systematic, and it has to be a conscious choice to say, this must be the outcome, how do we get there, rather than if we offer the opportunity, great, and work in the right place is great, but there's got to be a systematic part to this as well.
Chris, can I just ask you briefly to comment as well on the question that I put from Glenn regarding sort of support for academic research, support for those organisations which appear to be thriving in the North East, about showing the value of physical activity and sport. And I also put Andy Maddox's point. Our learning in Doncaster as one of the 12 local delivery pilots shows we local leaders can add great value if we co-design with communities rather than top-down approach. Our submission of evidence with the LTA highlights the potential if we are less risk averse, as Chris has alluded to.
I think, as Tanni touched on, really, we've got plenty of evidence for a lot of this stuff, and the information is there. So it can be the collation of it across. Is collation a word? I'm not quite sure. Should be collating it across different agencies of government, and I think that's something we could get a lot better at. To actually bring the data together, so we realise the impact of this, because we tend to have a siloed view of sport, physical activity. We spoke earlier, it's a physical outcome, and we don't touch on what happens on the bus or what happens to the mental health, which gives you a chance. What's the impact of just stepping off for a couple of hours from your daily life on the cost to the NHS? So these are the things that we need to do is join the data up. I don't think we're not short of it. I think it's that collation. I think the insight that we need to get better at.
Okay, I think it's what Ken is achieving at Stockport, and you know the situation at Bury and various other places. You know, I could go to local. I keep going back to cricket. Forgive me in respect to that, but at certain cricket clubs near to where I am, there will be 300 or 400 people on a Friday night watching the kids training. And it's this idea that sport brings a community together. You know, it brings people from different backgrounds in respect of, you know, a shared interest, a shared joy, a shared passion. And I just wondered, it's a big question, but the link between that captive audience, if you've got 10,000 people going to a football stadium, the question for wider policymakers, I think, is how do we tap into that? How do we try to work in partnership to make sure that we can get to those 10,000 people in terms of health sporting outcomes? It's a big question, but I just wonder what your thoughts are in respect to that, and especially what Ken's doing. I mean, it sounds absolutely fabulous at Stockport.
Well, I don't know if
I think we need to go on an iPad course.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the collective value of sport is huge. I mean, you're talking about spectators there, and I think the value of sport is about 85 billion, I think, of the collective value, which is absolutely enormous. So in a business sense, it's absolutely huge. But I think coordination is still, at the risk of beating the same drum, the coordination of getting that information and value across. A big part of my job actually is to go, do you realise that if we don't do X on this, which looks like completely different, you don't meet your decarbonisation targets, and getting it joined up. And that's something I think that Sport England can help with. I'm not quite sure if that directly answers your question, Chair.
Yeah, it did. It was a
well, that's a relief.
Baroness Massam has joined us. Baroness Massam, is there anything you'd like to add to what we've been hearing today? You've got to come off mute.
I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
No, I think communication coordination is very important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all accept with Baroness Massam. There is obviously there is a health benefit, a social benefit, but I think there's definitely a cultural benefit to sport and shared sporting experiences. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, sport in rehabilitation is absolutely vital. This was Gutman's big philosophy at Stoke Mandeville many years ago. He said, if he could get young men injured from war back to work through sport, that was the great way.
Brilliant. Sarah, can I ask if you've got anything else you want to say, Sarah? We're coming to an end of the last 5 minutes now.
No, it's been very interesting, but one of the things I just think we do need to harness the facilities that we've got in the areas in the north and appreciate what they do to the culture in those areas. So like I said, I'm very lucky with the way that my club does that, but it's just continuing to support them.
Tanni, in terms of our report, what would you say we should do? What's the headline thing, or what would you like us or the University of Sheffield, who are working with, to sort of concentrate to take away from this?
For me, it's about how we can talk, I guess, get sport and physical activity higher up the political agenda. This is about prevention, not cure. This is not just sport for sport's sake, although sport for sport's sake is brilliant. And we just need to just be better joined up. You know, there is money in the system. There's lots of support out there, but actually as a sector, we just need to be better.
Yeah. And that issue of inclusivity, Tanni, what do we do in respect of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge, because whether that's you know, getting young people from different backgrounds into sport, or keeping them in sport, or getting them onto boards. If it was easy, it would have been fixed years ago. And you know, for years I feel like I've been talking about women on boards. I've probably been talking about it for 30 years, and we're now at a point where it's not too bad. Not as good as other diversity is not there. I think there's only one or two disabled people who sit on any national governing body of sport. So, you know, that's my job,
isn't it?
Sorry, say that again.
That fact is just that utter scandal, isn't it? And that they, you know, unless we address some underlying issues like that, we're getting nowhere, are we? Really?
Yeah, you've got to have that lived experience, and but it's also the skills. There's no point. We're just having a debate on one board I sit on about having a young person, and you can stick a young person on really easily, not a problem. But actually, that young person has to be able to contribute and has to make. So it's what support needs to be put around those people. So we all need to look at our own organisations and think about where that diversity is and what more we need to do. And it's paying it forward and paying it back.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question about what politicians can do to get involved in this. I mean, Tanni, just in terms of schools, what do you think is the? You know, obviously, schools got a big part to play in this. How do you think they should be part of this agenda?
Schools, really simple. We have trained PE teachers in primary schools. The reason independent schools are good at sport is not just because of money. It is partly because of money, and it's a little bit about facilities, but it's about you have fully trained PE teachers at the prep school level. I would make physical literacy, not sport, actually something that you know has the same status as literacy and numeracy, because it's about healthy mind, body, spirit. We don't teach kids trigonometry without teaching them basic maths. We expect them to play sport without teaching them physical literacy. And I've no idea how long I've been talking about this, but there are some relatively simple things, because actually it's how you engage with. I was a sporty kid in school. I could have had the worst PE teacher in the world and I would have loved sport. But actually, if you don't engage with it, then you know, and teaching physical education is really hard, because of just the whole range of skills and ability and enjoyment of it. So I'd look at education, because we've got to make it fun. We've got to make it interesting. We've got to make people want to do it, even if they hate it, because actually it's about lifelong health and fitness. So we've got to find ways to engage, and it's got to be done. And
Tanni, I think Chris has just claimed that he was rubbish at sport at school. I might be reading that incorrectly, but Chris, the final minute is yours, Chris, just in terms of summing up and what you think and how we can, you know, what we can feed into our report, which we can obviously take to government.
Well, I put it in the chat for the sake of brevity, actually, my conclusion that joining up and what underpins, I think, Tanni's points is for that to happen, the value has got to be visible across the spectrum for people to realise, actually, this is really important, isn't it? We should give it a higher priority and more focus. So I think that joining up, I think, is for me is the single point. And for being rubbish at school, at sport, I think what was important, I got bullied at school and I left with quite low self-esteem. I got that from sport. I got self-worth. It wasn't a particularly healthy way to get it, but I got my self-worth and things that I needed from sport, being able to do something that at last people valued this and I could do it. And all of these values are the ones that we need to make make visible, and they do have a financial value to society, as well as culturally, as pertains to this to this hearing.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. Can I we've run out of time, sadly. Can I thank everyone for coming here today, for listening to our fantastic panelists, for everybody taking part. Can I please encourage you, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the new year for the next evidence session. But thank you to everyone, to Chris, to Tanni, to Rick, to Ken, to Baroness Massam, to Sarah, for all giving you time. It's a really interesting topic that we're all going to take forward as parliamentarians. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.